Three, two, one. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwikta.
This is Merps. We're gonna play Arena. We're gonna talk Arena. Let's talk Arena.
Yeah, we're not going to play Arena right now. We're going to talk Arena. And we're actually going to dig in this episode. The last two episodes were kind of like figuring out what's going on, big meta picture things, talking about changes Blizzard has been making to adapt a new expansion into the 10.4 system. But we haven't really told you more about how to play in the meta than we did before the expansion came out when it was 10.4. And really, still right now, the bucket system is making a much bigger impact than Witchwood meta, right? Like, we're calling it the Witchwood meta, but what we really mean is like a slight twist on the 10.4 meta that happened before Witchwood was ever released.
Which cards exist? That's about it.
Yeah, Witchwood cards exist, and the meta is shaped right now by two classes that have, like, it's just not fair to play with them. I'm averaging more than 9 wins per run with these two classes, and averaging less than 6.5 wins per run with all the other classes. That means not a single other class am I averaging more than 6.5 wins per run with. Like, that's a...
Wow.
I can't remember the last time my win rates were so starkly different. Like, even back in the days of, like, Mage, Paladin, Rogue, whatever dominance, like, the difference wasn't between 9 and 6.5. You know, the difference was between, like, 8 and 6.5. So...
All right.
Like, the sample sizes aren't terribly huge. You know, we don't sit there and spam out 30 arenas. But it's not a coincidence, right? That HS Replay also has these two classes at around 55 win rates apiece, while the other classes, except for Mage, are all sitting below 50%, and Mage is like at 50.5%.
Right. Your win rate, it definitely fits the the expectations,
Yeah.
right?
And when you get to the higher win rates as any other class, around like 7 or like 8 wins, you just start seeing Paladins. You don't see Rogues because people don't play Rogue. I think Rogue is still more of a higher skilled class, and that people are more comfortable with like Mage and Paladin, and even like Hunters more so than they are with Rogues. So you don't see as many Rogues. You see a lot of Paladins, but the Rogues that you do see are all like insanely good. It's easier, and a part of that is structural. Part of it is the cards, and this kind of brings together, right? This is the, like, hey, I told you so moment. This whole entire, like, this Lightforge is gonna be broken into like two giant themes. One is like, let's figure out what is happening because all this is new and it was very difficult to predict. And the other part is, oh, but these specific things we predicted, I told you so. They're all like kind of like, in the last 2 weeks, we've been in the meta for a while. It's all kind of come together, right? Like, if you look back at our predictions for Witchwood, it was Rogues and Paladins.
Yeah.
And at first, it was like just Paladins, but Rogues caught on quickly enough.
Right. And a lot of it was the cards that were rotating out were not that, like, compared to the other classes, Rogues and Paladins weren't losing a lot, and Rogues were getting some really good cards, right?
And Paladins were getting decent cards too, including one really good card. That's our card good bad today that we'll talk about later.
Yes.
But as we talked a lot before, like, a lot of the specifics about how good a class is going to come down to how Blizzard buckets stuff. And we're gonna go one step further than that, or rather maybe one step backwards, one step more basic than that, than like looking for bucketing value. So I've been trying to find a way to best communicate this whole thing about how to draft in 10.4 in the new meta, right? Because
okay,
like, we were talking about this last week. You used the word the destiny of the deck, right? The phrase destiny of the deck. And that's really stuck with me since you've said it, because that's exactly how the meta is. Like, your decks are going to carry you much more than your gameplay will. Not saying a player with like an above average deck and like crappy gameplay skill will get the same record than a player with good skill with the same deck. It's not saying skill is out the window, but that higher level skill in gameplay, at least up to now, I certainly haven't figured out how to like super apply it. Like, I talk about, like, I'm pretty proud of my 9+ wins per run with Rogue/Paladin, but I don't think I'm an outlier. Like, I don't think I'm performing particularly like better than other good players are in this meta with Rogue and Paladin. I think everyone's kind of seeing that kind of success, and it's because they get the best decks. So your skill is a multiplier on how good the deck is, but that multiplier's range is now compressed, and the range of how good a deck can be or how bad a deck can be is, well, the range of how decks usually are good or usually are bad is now enlarged. The parts that are out of your control, right? The RNG parts within a draft is now actually larger than before. Because before, the naturally controlling factor of how good your deck is was the fact that you get 3 choices. Now you don't get 3 choices. Now you get 1 choice of quality, right? Like every single set of picks, you're offered only 1 choice of which bucket. Whereas before, you're going to be offered 3 cards from probably 3 different buckets, and you just like pick the best bucket, and then you consider other things like curve and whatever.
Right. So we stated this last time as well, and just very quickly, it's almost as if instead of the 90 sort of shots that you get in the old system, now you get 30. It's a little bit simplified, but because right now in each pick, it's like supposedly cards are of the same quality. So the number of chances, the number of shots that you get has been decreased, even though at the end you still make a 30 card deck.
So now that we're in a Destiny of the Deck meta, the real focus, I think, is going to be on the actual drafting part. And it's something that I think a lot of people have been playing around with. I've been playing around with it. I've been trying to draft different ways. I started off like focusing on value, like as if it were the old drafting system, and that just did not work. So like the difference of tier list values, except for the like actual like arbitraging that you can do, right? Where you're like, oh, they've totally misbucketed Cube, right? They think Cube is a bad card. Cube is not a bad card. It's a great card. So we're going to get a lot of value on that. It used to be Bone Drake back forever, and we had an episode all about that. So it's not like tier lists are useless, but when it comes to making a choice, basing it purely off tier list, even in the very early draft, it just doesn't yield as great decks as you have the capability of getting on a fairly decent consistency now if you use some different drafting strategies. So I've been trying to work out how specifically the strategies work, and I have some ideas that I'm playing around with. Usually, like up to this point, because we haven't had a huge drafting difference than we've seen now, we've been pretty, like, we could just tell you what is right, basically. Like, we'll say, like, oh, put your own spin on it, or, like, you know, go with the draft, but there are certain principles that just, if you consistently follow that versus following a different principle, that the principle we're telling you to follow would get you just better results. And I don't have the confidence right now at this stage in 10.4 to say that I know what those principles are if they exist, but I am exploring some things that have seen positive results for me. And I kind of want to like throw some of these ideas out. If you guys want to discuss it, or if you think I'm wrong, feel free to comment. I'm certainly still exploring this. I'm not presenting this as like, do this, it'll definitely work, or this is definitely better than another strategy.
But it has worked for you so far.
It's worked for me so far. So in one sense, like if you're just floundering out there, like if your average win rate is like 2 wins per run lower, and we see these comments all the time, right? Like, oh my God, 10.4 launch. Now, like I used to get 5.5 wins per run. Now I get 3. Like, okay, if you just follow these strategies, you'll do better than that. Because it is an adaptation to 10.4. But I'm not saying that maybe 2 months from now, I'm not going to tell you something totally different, right?
Sure.
But this is where I am in the process of adapting to 10.4. So the new draft philosophy that I have is to start off your draft. I think the critical component of the draft used to be in like your last 5 to 10 picks. Because you kind of go with the draft, you just pick off the tier list for the most part, avoid certain pitfalls. But in the old system, towards the last few picks, that's when you like fill out your curve. That's when you figure out when you can be greedy. That's when you like really go to your archetype, right? All of your major drafting decisions are made in your last 5 to 10 picks. And that was the old system. And the new system flips it on its head. It's almost halfway back to the synergy picks era that we had for a little bit ago. But this one's obviously more comprehensive and more well thought out, and it works better. Because you just have to kind of give up the illusion that you have any control over your draft, right? Your draft is RNG. Blizzard will tell you what cards you have in your draft much more so than before. So rather than trying to control for the downside, just accept that some of your decks are going to be total crap, and that there are enough bad players out there that you're still going to get your, like, I don't know, maybe 4-win average instead of I used to say I could get any deck to 5 wins. Now I think a better answer is probably 4 wins. I feel a little less in control because there are some truly terrible decks now compared to the average deck that would never have been the case in a prior, like before 10.4. But anyway, so your last couple picks, your last like 5 picks, definitely your last 5 picks, maybe even your last 10 picks in this new drafting system are, I think, easier than your first 10 picks or your middle 10 picks. Because by that point, you already know what your deck needs. You already know where your deck is going. And most importantly, you know that you will never ever have to sacrifice value to get it. If you're offered a good, let's say you need 2 drops and you're offered a good bucket. Well, if you need to take that Amani, you need to take that Amani. On the other hand, if you need 2 drops and you're offered a bad bucket, well, you know, if you need to take that like 2 mana 2/2 and that's like necessary for your deck, you take it there. But you're not going to lose out on a True Silver to do that. You're never faced with these kinds of like decisions anymore. So where Blizzard thought, oh, we're going to make your decision making so much more difficult by giving you similarly valued cards, that only holds true for the first like 2/3 of your draft. From your last part of the draft, your decision making is incredibly easy. You just take what your deck needs. And you can do it with very minimal loss of value. So knowing that you are going to lose very little value by going in that direction, it frees you up in the earlier part of your draft to kind of craft your deck towards something, right? Originally, we're always about controlling for the downside, because if you try to make your deck do something and it doesn't, then you're going to have to start sacrificing a ton of value to get your curve, right? Or a ton of value to make sure your archetype works out, or a ton of value to make sure your synergies work out. That used to be the case before 10.4. There's no sacrifice anymore. Like, Blizzard got rid of the concept of, I'm going to take a Raptor over a True Silver because it's better for my deck. You don't have that choice ever.
Yeah. I think this is all right. So when we play together, first of all, did you have anything? I don't want to interrupt like the manifesto here.
No, go for it. It's not so much. I'm just trying to spitball some ideas out, that principles that I'm following. So I think if we summarize that, the first principle that I'm going to say is like the last part of the draft, you fill out what your deck needs to become the deck that you wanted it to be from the very beginning, right?
Yep. Okay, I think that's good. And I will say 2 examples immediately come to mind of that illustrate, I think, what you're talking about here. And I've definitely seen these principles of yours at work, right? When we co-op, like I see you sort of implementing this thought process as we draft.
And you see me developing these principles, because I didn't like, if you played with me like 3 weeks ago, yeah, we've been in 10.4 at that point for like 3 weeks, but like I wasn't there yet.
Right. So 2 examples, and one that worked out and one that didn't work out, or one in which there's some regret about the draft. Let's talk about the one that in which we followed this style, but it didn't exactly work out. But that's kind of okay, right? So we drafted this mage, remember? And at the very beginning, I was like, oh man, I want to go big mage with Spiteful and with Raven. Right? Spiteful Summoner and with Raven. And you're just like, okay, let's go for it. You're just like, yeah, I don't like, sure, you can go for it. You weren't like, yes, definitely go for it. It's the best strategy. But you're like, okay, yeah, you know, you can
doesn't
definitely go
really
for
matter,
it.
right? Like, Blizzard gives you the freedom to do this.
Right, definitely. So we went for it. And you know what? At the end, we didn't get there. But the deck itself was also just,
it was a very low value deck, right? Like, all of Twitch had the average vote was somewhere 4, I think maybe 5, like, wins.
Right. And I think at the end we got like, I don't remember.
We were 8-0, okay? And then we like died because we hit the wall of people with actually just way better decks than us. And it's not even like crazy stuff that killed us. It was just like, yeah, okay, we're just happy at 8 wins. We're happy to be here.
Right.
Like, we're going to try to steal a game or 2 from you guys. But overall, just whatever happens at this point is a bonus.
So that's one example in which, we went for early. It didn't work out, but I totally agree. This is just stuff that you have to go for, right? You just have to go for. And it's so weird for me as someone who's played the arena since like beta, essentially, the very beginning. It is really weird because your first few picks are almost like, I wouldn't say no-brainers, but like your first 15 picks before used to be just like, okay, what's the best card here? I'm going to pick the best card.
Like, remember my whole, like, somewhat meme that was actually me being completely serious? Just pick the best card?
Pick the best card.
That was literally like 25 picks. Just pick the best card. There's no thinking here.
Now it's completely dead.
Now it's completely, that's no longer a thing. You can't just go there and be like, pick the best card. Because I tried that. I was like, we create the tier list, right? Like, we're going to follow the tier list. And that's just not the best strategy in the mid-draft right now. Not that the tier list is useless, but outside of identifying extreme outliers, the tier list is not doing all that much work in the mid-draft.
Right. And
or late draft.
Another example.
But it's always been a little iffy on the late draft because,
Right. Anyways, another example that I think also supports this very well was that Hunter draft that we did together, in which at the very beginning, I remember one of the picks that I did was, I think, there was a Spellstone in there. It was like the second pick or something. And it was Spellstone versus a really good...
I was so upset. I was so upset. Right. I was like, you had it. You had it. They gave it to you.
Right. And, I didn't pick the Spellstone. And because I didn't... And here's the thing with these picks right now. If you don't pick the first Spellstone, you're disincentivized to pick the next Spellstone / picking a secret, right? And in that deck, it would have actually worked out. We could have had like triple Spellstone with like 5 secrets or something.
And they would have all been, here's the key is that they would have all been reasonable picks to pick regardless, because Blizzard's already bucketed it for you. Like, you were never going to lose that much. You never had to like reach for a secret and give up a, I don't know, name really good Hunter card. Right? Like, I don't know. Like, Hunters, by the way, if you guys aren't watching or like looking at HS replay, like win rates, Hunter is like below 45% right now. Please don't play Hunter. It is terrible. Like, we played 3 Hunters in a row on Merps's birthday because that was his birthday wish.
Yeah, losing. Woo.
Hey, we got 7 wins twice, okay?
We did.
You started off with 3-0, but then I joined you and righted the ship and made you no longer go aggro.
You mean 0-3?
0-3, right.
Yeah. I think that deck was kind of doomed.
That was a horrible deck. You didn't even make it poorly, but you just had like an aggressive agenda and then got no good cards and like nothing to recover from. It was like, here's all my minions.
If you try to make an aggressive deck, you kind of end up with that. And wow, that really showed what happens. Yeah. So anyways,
don't do that, guys.
Don't do that. But anyways, back to the draft that I was talking about. I think that was a really, really good lesson, and it showed a lot of these principles that you're talking about. So number one, you do have to go for these synergies at the very beginning. You have to commit early and say like, yeah, I'm going to go for a Spellstone deck. And right now Spellstones are good. Like they definitely are. You're able to hit these, or with Hunter, sort of 1A to that point. You need to hit these if you're a hunter, especially, right? And this is one of those principles that you talked about before. Like, this is very different from if you're a paladin and you can sort of play it safe because your deck is going to be good or at least decent, versus hunter, in which you're just like, dude, you need to hit your Spellstones if you want a chance of winning. So that was something that, looking back on, I was like, yeah, that was totally correct. We have to go for those synergies, and if it doesn't work out, whatever.
Right, like your downside is so low right now. Blizzard has made sure that the greedy player in the draft is not punished.
Right.
So be the greedy player.
Yeah, and the way I was drafting for consistency.
Yeah. I mean, you were drafting the way we had drafted for like 3.5 years, right? Like,
right.
Because if you go for it, then like you're faced with crappy decisions later on anyway about whether to feed your synergy or to take the best card. And that's not as much of a thing now. Your downside is heavily protected. Okay, so the last 10 picks, fill it out, low downside. It's pretty easy. Like, I know I'm starting from the back, and then moving to the front. When in a draft, you're starting from the front, so you may be like a little bit like not like seeing the whole picture. But I want to bring out this the last picks first, because this is the foundation of the entire theory. Like whenever you feel uncomfortable doing things in the early draft, just know that Blizzard is giving you the safety net. Blizzard gives everybody the safety net. So if you don't use the safety net, you're going to get a lot fewer great decks. Whereas your bad decks are not really going to be like that much worse than if you had drafted conservatively because of the safety net. So if Blizzard is creating the draft that way, you have to adjust in the same way. So now let's go back to the beginning. I'm doing this in like the weirdest order, right? I'm doing the last picks first, then the first picks, then the middle picks. The first 5 picks, as Merps was describing, you want to pick on potential. Like any card that gives your deck a potential to do something. And these are usually high synergy picks. Remember again, Blizzard's already bucketed everything for you. You're not losing out by picking a high synergy pick. And if you're taking it in the beginning of the draft especially, you have a very good chance of hitting your synergy. As opposed to taking it like mid-draft, right? When you don't have the synergy. Obviously, picking it in late draft when you already have the synergy is best. And that's how we used to advise people draft. But right now, you go for it in the very beginning. And like the first 5 picks, I'm not trying to fill out curve exactly. What I'm trying to do is pick cards that have potential to create a winning kind of like deck. Like a deck that can get higher value than Blizzard wants to give me. Like, there's only so much you can do here. You can't make Blizzard give you better cards. And Blizzard's giving everybody, like, a deck value now. Blizzard used to give everybody card values, and then you create the highest deck value deck versus a more cohesive deck, and that's what you had to balance. Right now, Blizzard's controlling the deck quality. Not to make everyone equal, but to make sure you can't get a higher quality, like, a higher tier list value deck than Blizzard wants you to have. So all you can control, all that's remaining of your decision making is the cohesiveness of your deck. That's all you should be worrying about. Again, I keep bringing this up, but there are misbucketed cards, right? Those always get picked. But the misbucket, like the heavily misbucketed cards aside, you're usually going to see correctly bucketed cards, especially after the hotfix, right? It's when Blizzard adjusted the Witchwood cards, so now it's in a better bucket. Okay, so that's the first 5 picks, and cards with potential are high synergy cards or they are high archetype cards. So we're talking high synergy, like Merps was talking about. Spellstones are a really good example. Even if you have something like a Violet Teacher, right? Like, and you could take more spells. The archetype defining cards are like, for example, if you start off and you take a very like card draw card, right? So you take a sprint in the very beginning. Not that I advise you take a sprint. You may be like backed into taking a sprint later anyway. Or you take like a backstab. That means you're going to go more aggressive. Like take those cards earlier than your more middling, like, oh, this is going to be good regardless cards, right? Like, I'm trying to find a good example. Let's just use Paladin as an example. Here's your first bucket in Paladin. This is the absolute top bucket. Here are all the Paladin cards. I'm not going to comment on the neutral cards. It's True Silver, Consecration, Blessing of Kings, Aldor, Spike-Rich Steed, Vine Cleaver, Call to Arms, and Dino Size. Blizzard win rates say that all these are approximately the same. We rate Vine Cleavers above these, and like Aldor is also like really up there, and the rest are like lagging a little bit behind. But the important one to look at is what archetypes are you able to build with these? What synergies can you get with these, right? And that's where like Steed stands out a lot in that, and along with Blessing of Kings, although Steed is just kind of better, so you never pick Blessing of Kings if you can help it. Steed has a very clear purpose. Get on the board by turn 6. Steed, win. All right. Call to Arms has a very good purpose. You know exactly how to fill out the rest of your deck when you take a Call to Arms to get maximum value. Cards that don't have very good purposes, like True Silver, that really doesn't have a good purpose. Consecration does not have a very good purpose. Yeah, it's kind of a control card, but like you're very rarely going to actually consecrate and control the board that way. Like, those are not good picks for your first 5 picks. Aldor is just generally a good card, but again, you want your Aldors later. Like, these are kind of punting, right? These are saying, like, this will be good in any deck. Before, we advised you to draft flexibly in the very beginning so your deck can go wherever. Right now, I would prefer to just take a stab at something in the very beginning and try to fill the destiny of the deck. So if we're talking about the destiny of the deck, Blizzard no longer hands you a deck with a destiny. Before, we drafted in a very flexible way so that you ended up with the best value deck that still made cohesive sets. So your goal was highest tier list value that still made cohesive sets. Now your goal is most cohesive deck possible that Blizzard will control the tier list value for. So what is the destiny of your deck? Well, if you don't have a cohesive deck, you don't have a destiny. Your destiny is whatever tier list value Blizzard happened to give you, minus whatever extra value other people could have gotten, plus whatever other people created totally non-functional decks, like without 2 and 3 drops, or like, people do horrible things, right? Maybe they don't know that like 10.4 has even happened, right? Or maybe they just really suck, or maybe it's their first arena, who knows? But if you actually do create your own destiny within the draft, then not only does your deck have a longer destiny, like a longer road ahead of it just normally, so your gameplay doesn't have to carry as much, and really in these days your gameplay can't carry as much, but on top of that, you have things to do in your middle picks. So we talked about the last 10 picks, and we talked about the first 5 picks. Finally, the core of your draft, the actual difficult part of your draft. Because the last 10 picks, like I said, if you just know what is going on in the arena, you can do a pretty good job in the last 10 picks, I think. You've been doing this for how long now, right? Like 3 years, like however long you've been playing Hearthstone, you've been doing the last 10 picks. And it's the same principles, and Blizzard's made it easier for you by making sure all the tier list values are the same. First 5 picks, you just kind of have to go down a list of which cards synergize harder. It's really not that hard. And your middle 15 picks, that's where the meat is. That's where you create the destiny of your deck. And that is hard, because sometimes it's easy. Like if I start off my draft and I take, let's say, a Call to Arms, and then I pick a whole bunch of 2-drops because they're offered to me on a platter, like I'm good. But other times, you may have to abandon a card, right? Like let's say you take a Spellstone for your first pick, and halfway down the like 10 picks in, you're like, I haven't been offered any secrets. And another card comes up, let's say another Spellstone. Do you double down or do you abandon the secrets? You don't have to continue down that way, right? You're trying to map the destiny, but you have to give up sometime. Because having 2 Spellstones with like 2 secrets is not going to get you very far. And if you look back on that mage draft that we did, for example, that Merps was talking about, we gave up on the big spell thing.
We did, yeah. We drafted like Glyph, we drafted a few small spells, and also like a couple of secrets to like kind of severely reduce the cost of all of the stuff in our deck. Yeah.
Because we stuck with it too. We lost some value trying to go for only big spells. Like there was a certain period of time where I'm like, well, let's skip a Frostbolt and pick another card that's almost as good, because I don't want to, we could be a big spell deck. And then maybe around pick like 18, we were like, well, screw it. I'm not passing up a Primordial Glyph. Like it's not worth the Dragon's Fury and the Raven to not have a Glyph here when we're in need of some, initiative in the deck. And that's more severe than our chance of actually completing this deck. So it's arena. It's still a lot of RNG in the draft. You still don't get to fully control where you don't just say like, I want these cards in my deck and get them. That's not how it works. So don't be afraid to have an imperfect deck. Imperfect decks can do quite well in this meta, as long as you're like 1 or 2 cards imperfect, right? Like if you ditch something you're not going to get a 12-win deck, but you can still do quite well in this meta if you pivot at the right time. And usually you want to pivot to something else, right? Like to a more aggressive deck, like pick another Destiny. So
right.
Sometimes Blizzard hands you a Destiny. Sometimes you have to create your own Destiny. Keep yourself open to all of these through the first like 5 picks and then the middle 15 picks. That's like the general kind of thing to say about it. And I realize I gave kind of a crappy example with the highest bucket in Paladin, because I just picked the most overpowered bucket in the entire game, and all those cards are really good.
Right. So when you were kind of trashing, no, quote, trashing True Silver and
Yeah.
Consecration, it's like, are they good cards? Like, yeah, they're extremely good cards. It's just going by your sort of principle, right? At the first pick, these are cards that are just a little bit safe,
Yeah.
right? Like, are they good? Yeah, they're good. And you will find a good use for them if you draft them. You're never going to be like disappointed that you picked one of these. But once again, and part of the reason why people complain about Steed is Snowball into Steed is so game winning,
Yeah.
right? Like Steed on even just a 1/1 that has initiative and it's so backbreaking. And what it does is if you lead into Steed, after you Steed, it opens it up to all of the other game winners, right? Steed into Vine Cleaver is just complete GG. Or Steed into a turn 7 and then into Silver Sword is just, yeah, it is much more backbreaking than a lot of the other cards, which are just very good.
Yeah, let me give another example that may help illuminate what I'm talking about. Let's take Rogue,
Sure.
the third highest bucket, where the cards have a little bit of flaws. They're not just like the best cards ever. Let's say you have a Cavern Shiny Finder versus a Shadow Blade. And let's say, hypothetically, that these cards are not terribly different in value. And I don't think they're terribly different in value. And they're kind of going towards the same synergy, right? If you take a Cavern Shiny Finder, you want more weapons. If you take a Shadow Blade, you would kind of want more Cavern Shiny Finder. Like, is there a correct pick here? In the first 5 picks, I would argue there is. Because you would want the Cavern Shiny Finder in order so that you can know that you need X number of weapons. Like, you can change the rest of your draft to fit that. And it's a very rare draft that you will have to significantly dip in value to not have enough weapons. So you can definitely make Cavern Shiny Finder good. Now, if you were offered another option, let's say you add Spellbreaker in there, well then Spellbreaker is the worst option. Because Spellbreaker doesn't synergize with anything. It's just kind of an independently good card. Right? Let's say you add a Tar Creeper in there. Those are not any of the first 5 picks should not have Spellbreakers, should not have Tar Creepers. You take anything you can build a deck out of. What's a really good card in this bucket? Plague Scientist. Right. That's a really good card in this bucket. Is it actually better than Shadow Blade or Cavern Shiny Finder? No, it's not a better card than them objectively in like the average deck. But once you have a Plague Scientist, you can get tokens. And that's a direction that you can pick your deck. So you can, and these are not a synergy where it's like, oh, I have 1 Plague Scientist now, I will get 10 cards with tokens. No. But now you can make sure that you build, like, let's say 3 tokeny cards into your deck. So you can find these card-to-card synergies. And so you can really make them work for you and get the extra values out of your deck. Like, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And, like, if you pick the Plague Scientist and then later on in a turn, you're faced with something like Earthen Ring Farseer versus a Grim Necromancer, right? And you kind of need both. You're just like, oh, Grim Necro is really good with what we have, right? It's just a really good card anyways. It's like, is Earthen Ring good? It's pretty good. And yeah, I mean, it's a very close pick, right? But now that you know you have this sort of upside card that just gets better as you, as you have more tokens, it's like, oh, Grim Necro is just naturally a good card. And now I know which one is the more right pick because I set myself up to have this situation.
Yep. So if you're looking at the tier list and you're like, oh, but one card is 10 points higher than the other card, it doesn't matter for the first 5 picks. Like, the 10 points don't matter in the first 5 picks. The 10 points only matter if there's no other decisions that you need to be making here. Like, the 10 points matter if you're debating between a Plated Beetle and a Tar Creeper. Like, sure, take into account those 10 points. Those are both, like, pretty normal-ish cards for your first, like, couple of picks, right? Like, if you're debating between a Tar Creeper and a Tangle for Mystic and a Walnut Sprite, right? Like, go ahead, follow the tier list. That's what it's there for if you want to eke out, like, that tiny, like, 5%, 10% value. But when you have choices to have potentials in the first 5 pick those. And then the hard part, and this is the part where I don't think I can adequately teach people how to draft in the middle 15 picks, like, assuming my whole theory is correct in the first place, because it's a very complicated, like, that's where Blizzard has staked out the draft, right? That's where Blizzard says, okay, this is what 10.4 is about. This is why we think it's a much richer drafting experience. It's because of the middle 15 cards. And those are hard picks. And that's why our drafts now are like running for like twice as long at least as they used to.
Yeah.
Okay, so I hope that kind of illuminates part of the drafting process for you, and just feel it out. You'll kind of see what I mean, and do like these like backwards tests if you can, like especially if you use a program, whether it's that like remembers your picks. So you can look and say like, well, what if I went a different way? What would have happened? And usually you'll find that if you went a different way and like, oh no, it messed up, you didn't actually hit the stuff you wanted to hit, it's still pretty good, like it's still okay. And on the other hand, if you went for it and it did hit, it becomes a really good deck. So
cool.
Yeah, that's my little spiel on 10.4 drafting as it applies to Witchwood.
I think this is really like this is more sort of game changing than we've sort of let on, or not game changing, but it's so different from what we're used to because no previous changes to the arena changed the way that you drafted, right? And this is really like, you're absolutely correct. It flipped everything sort of upside down. And it took me a while to sort of get this as well. And you know, once again, not saying that you have figured this out, not saying that like I have figured it out in any way, but it does seem like this is the case now where because of the restrictions that Blizzard has made, the upside, like sort of the edges that you can obtain are within the cohesiveness. And then you got to go for these risks, right? You got to sort of go for these synergy picks almost. And you can't be afraid to miss with it because as a player, as an Infinite player for years and years, you've been told it's like, reduce risk, right?
It's
like
about controlling risk.
Right. It's like, don't go for the synergies, especially early.
Definitely don't do it early. That's why synergy picks were so bad. They forced you into synergies in the very beginning before you had the rest of the deck.
Right. And even back then, it's like, okay, well, if I can just pick a 12-year Stone Shaper and get like a 3/5, it's like, oh yeah, 3/5.
I've escaped synergy picks.
Right, definitely. But now it's sort of like you should go for them. And it's so true because before when you went for the synergies and you suddenly saw a synergy card but was like 40 points lower on the tier score, you're just like, oh gosh, that's terrible, but I could go for it, right? And synergies, it's always one of those things where like the more of a synergy card you have, the more powerful sort of the synergy is. It depends on the synergy, but anyways, so you want to go for it. And now you're right, like you go for it, and you know, even if you hit it, it's amazing, right? And it gives you an edge on other decks. And if you don't hit it, well, your quality is still pretty much the same as other people because Blizzard gives you that safety net. It's like you're never, you know, giving up an S tier card in order to pick your like below average synergy card. So yeah.
All right. 10.4 drafting. Let's talk more specifics now. So we're still in the draft. We're not going to talk about gameplay because gameplay hasn't changed too much, and it also doesn't matter as much, which is a big problem Blizzard has, and we focused on that enough in previous podcast episodes. So let's talk about drafting the classes if you're tryharding, right? Top two classes, like we said, Paladins and Rogues. If you see them, pick them. They are that good. I would argue Rogues are better than Paladins right now, mostly because Rogues are harder to play and they have a higher win rate. Like when you combine those two, like you know that they're better. And then you add the fact that you see a lot more Paladins than Rogues, and Rogues counter Paladins, always has, probably always will due to the hero power. You're really not going to go wrong picking Rogue. And Paladins, of course, are the overpowered class that's actually shaping the meta itself. So if you can't beat them, join them. And none of the other classes can be Paladin right now, so you should join them as your next step. And if all else fails, take Mage. They seem to be doing okay. Not saying the other classes are unplayable except Hunter, but it's not like you wouldn't do it. There's not like a secret pre-strategy that makes it better than Paladin. Like that's not that. At least if there is one, I have not figured it out or seen a way that it can be used consistently. So So Rogues and Paladins are where it's at, and when we're talking about drafting, we could talk about certain strategies that you're drafting into. But I want to start with looking at the buckets that these cards are kind of being put into, and I want to make the same observation that I made before, which would even happen, which is that 2-drops are all over bucketed. They're not as over bucketed now as they used to be. Right? They used to be heavily over bucketed. Now they're like only significantly over bucketed, but they're still over bucketed. Your Amani Berserker and your like Mad Bomber are in the same category as your Shadow Blade. They're in the same category as your Silver Sword, right? Your Ghostly Charger. Like, these are not cards that are actually that good. And like Plated Beetle is in that same category. Like, don't take these cards if you can. And from that point on, you kind of see why Paladins and Rogues are so good. Because Paladins and Rogues fundamentally don't need 2-drops. And 2-drops, if you have them, take like 5 of your picks, let's say, right? So then let's say you can eke out 20 points of tier list value on each of these picks. You're a plus 100 tier list value on someone who needed 2-drops. Just tier list value. And all you've done is made a very simple decision in the beginning of your draft and say, like, I'm just not going to have 2-drops. Why? Because Blizzard uses win rates, and win rates use all classes, but I'm in a class that can do something on turn 2 without an actual 2-mana card in my hand, right? Rogue can keep tempo with a dagger, obviously the best, and Paladins can create a 1/1, which is not great, but it's something. Other classes don't do anything. I've gotten to the point where even for Warlock, I don't draft 2-drops. Like, that would be a crazy statement in most of the prior metas. And it's not like I'm necessarily going control. Sometimes I just pick my 1-drops and my 3-drops, and I still have a zoo-ish kind of deck, and it works totally well without 2-drops. Why? Because I've gotten so much value out of it. Because Warlocks may not have anything tempo-wise to do with their hero power, but the hero power accomplishes something. You get an extra card. You get one more option. Whereas the other hero powers literally do nothing, right? Like, you get 2 armor as warrior. You literally do nothing as priest. You could ping for 1 damage if your opponent has played a minion as mage, right? Like,
yeah.
For hunter, you can get 2 damage on your opponent's face, which is very useful, but like, you need to be on the board for that to mean anything as hunter. And not playing a 2-drop doesn't really work for that. So, at least for Warlock, I've switched over. For Shaman, I've also been experimenting with switching over to a little bit less success, because totems are not as good in the early game as, 1/1s, or even an extra card in your hand, because they just get killed. But just anytime you can get that kind of like value off your 2-drop, it just creates this ridiculous advantage as a class.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the big picture, like, for why I think like, on top of the card value things, I think Paladins and Rogues have that advantage just built into them. And if you have that advantage built into you, you should use it. Like, you should use that. And you should use that by not taking 2s. Like, I still see people taking 2s in Paladins and Rogues. It's going to get you, on average, just because of how drafting works, it's going to get you a lower win rate than not doing that. Unless Blizzard's messed up their draft, like, in a serious way. Just because of how 10.4 is set up. It systematically discourages you from taking 2-drops as Paladin and definitely as Rogue. So if you start the game with, let's say, a call to arms, right? Go for it. That's a synergy, and the synergies can very well overcome the other value you may get from not taking 2-drops, right? Like, you have an alternate route. Blizzard does give you the option to create your own decks now, and so I'm not saying all Paladins can't take 2-drops, but you better have a reason for it. Your starting position should be no 2-drops, and you can get convinced to take 2-drops. And that is, of course, unless the 2-drop is misbucketed. So the easy misbucket that's always been around is the Gastropod, right? You see a Gastropod, you take a Gastropod, because it's always criminally underbucketed, because people like save it rather than playing it for tempo for some reason.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up Call to Arms because when you were talking about these principles, Call to Arms was one of the cards I'm like, do you even like, even in the first few cards, like, do you pick Call to Arms? Because if I just pick the cards that go with Call to Arms, right? And Call to Arms is in like the top bucket
Top
here.
bucket, yep.
Yeah, man, I really am giving up value because I'm dipping into these sort of over bucketed cards quite often. And for just like the benefit of when I do get the Call to Arms, I can pull out like a decent amount, but I'm giving up like quite a lot of value for this one synergy here. So that was one of those cards in which it's high synergy, which typically, as you said, is worth it, right? And if you look at like, for example, the Spellstones, that's really worth it. But for Call to Arms, I'm just like, oh man, I don't know if I'm like if I want to pick that at all. Have you seen like Call to Arms work? I haven't seen that work.
I've seen Call to Arms work against me. I've drafted one decent deck with Call to Arms just to see how it does. You really have to lean into it, and it's not hard to lean into because you're always given the option to take 2-drops. So or like 2 mana cards that come out and they're decent, like they're a 3/2 or a 2/3 or a 2/2, and you only have to consciously avoid 1 mana cards that are minions, and you can do that because you always get value with the other picks, right? You're limiting your downside.
Right.
So is it like the best thing to do? I don't know, but it's a way to go, right? Like if you're offered Bone Mare, Dino Size, Call to Arms, I don't know. I think Call to Arms is a perfectly good pick. I'd probably take it over Bone Mare or Dino Size just to get something going. And it's Call to Arms, right? We rated a 119. We obviously don't think it's actually in the correct bucket, right? So I would typically avoid it. But depending on the drafting philosophy, and if you get other under-bucketed like kind of cards, and it's an early enough pick, or it's a late enough pick that that you already have your 2-drops in for whatever reason. But like I said, the first thing that you consider is whether it's bucketed correctly or vaguely correctly.
Right.
So
I also want to bring up this other point because I think most people would agree that rogues don't need 2s. And people have seen this before, not just in this meta. Like half the metas that Rogue have been in, more than half, it's well established among the community. It's like, okay, rogues don't need 2s. That's one of their strengths, right? Daggering on 2 is not bad. But I think a lot of people are a lot more uncomfortable with it's like Paladins not having 2-drops. And I see people right now in the chat being like, that's ridiculous. I don't agree. That's a losing strategy. But
I can tell you statistically, it's a winning strategy.
Yes. and I think one of the things that you do, because you're leaving something out here, and when we do co-op with Paladin, you stress this, and I remember this as well. You like taking 1s with Paladin.
Oh, yeah. When I say don't take 2-drops, I mean like take 1-drops.
Yes.
And you don't need as many 1-drops as you have 2-drops necessarily, but a 1-drop in Paladin is a 2-drop. If you don't have a 1-drop, like I would much rather have a 1-drop and a hero power on 2 than skip turn 1 and then play a real 2-drop.
Yeah. So this is the thing, right? Because 1-drops are not as over bucketed, or a lot of them are not as over bucketed as
they're actually usually under bucketed because 1-drops usually perform poorly in most people's decks because they don't know what they're doing with them.
Right. For example, Glacial Shard is in the 5th bucket, right? And we think Glacial Shard is extremely good. Like that is a 1-drop that can win you the game, actually. Like a freeze can be so clutch as to win you the game. And what happens is if you take 2-drops all the time, you're, like we said, you're systematically going down. But if you take 1-drops, so they have 2 benefits. Number one, you're not going down in score a lot.
You're going up in score. Like you're definitely going up in score when it comes to neutrals because Paladins and Rogues make better use of 1-drops than other classes, and neutrals they're not adjusting them bucket wise by class yet. So you're just gaining value rather than losing value with 2-drops. So you've like literally flipped it. I'm glad you brought up that point with the 1s and 2-drops because it's not just that you avoid losing the value, but you actually gain additional value on top of that.
Yeah. So if you pick 1-drops, because if you pick a 1-drop and then you hero power on 2, that's basically you having a 2-drop, right? Like that's exactly like you having a 2-drop. So that is, and you get the benefit of having more flexibility with the 1.
Yeah,
right?
with the
It's
coin
just,
too, right? Like, because if you have a
right.
coin, you can 1-3-3, which is much better than 2-2-3-4, because then you have to take even more 2-drops, and it's less likely to hit them.
Exactly. And it's also just much easier to squeeze it in on a turn to gain
Yeah.
that tempo or whatever. So I think it is important because if you say paladins don't need 2s, I think a lot of people immediately associate that with like, okay, they don't need 2s or below,
Oh yeah,
right?
no,
Which is
no,
definitely
no,
not
no, no,
true.
no. They need 1s, and they have
And
1s.
I've seen this work as well because it's so weird like in the older styles of paladin. I was like, oh yeah, like 1s are good because you can get on the board. I would take premium 1s, but I definitely need some 2s as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and now I'm just like, yeah, this is totally true. I take the good 1-drops because they are like under bucketed, and then I hero power. It's the exact same thing as if I took a 2. My deck is just so much better and it still works, right? And with how sticky boards are in general, like boards are just much tougher to get rid of. Even though, yes, if you had 1-drop and 2-drop, you'd have more tempo, but then your deck suffers in terms of quality, and you also are more likely to just run out of steam in general, right?
Yep.
So this is good, and I think this is important because you definitely sort of preach this a lot when we do co-op paladins, and I think it's a very good point. Like taking the 1-drops, not taking the 2-drops, and then making it up with the quality 3s, the quality 4s, and also just the power cards, right? The steeds and the silver swords. That's a very winning strategy.
Yeah, and the way you want to do as a paladin is to get on the board, right? So that's why most people take 2-drops, because they think, oh, well, I need to buff my guys. That's how paladin works. And to buff your guys, you need to go fast. And to go fast, you need 2-drops. Once you switch 2-drops with 1-drops, you see that it works better. And the argument now is, well, why don't you have 1-drops and 2-drops? Well, then your deck is too thin, right? Then you're committing more than 10 cards to your 1 to 2-drop slot. Then you're trying to be a hunter. And to be fair, paladins are better hunters right now than hunters. But it's just not an optimal strategy. That's like, you better have some really good synergies to go with that. So it's not like an unviable archetype, but it's not one you should be actively pushing for. It's not worth the 2-drops to do that before you have your synergy cards.
Sadly, a lot of classes are better hunters than hunters.
I was saying, right, when we were doing the mage, I'm like, we're a mage without 2-drops and without 1-drops. We should play as if we're a hunter, because that's how the deck plays.
Yeah, or if you're a warrior, you can play as a hunter.
Better. Oh, yeah, way better hunter. Way better hunter. Yeah.
Because you're going to get the weapons, right? You're going to get the weapons, and you can, figure out ways to protect your Frothing Berserker. I have had like Frothing Berserkers with 12 attack. It's pretty good. Like hunters wish they had something like Frothing Berserker. That would have been really good. Yeah. Anyways, once again, don't play hunters.
Yes. Okay. So let's start more specifically with paladin. So generally speaking, once you skip 2s, you have some 1s, but you also realize your deck is just naturally thicker than they used to be, and that helps because this is still a pretty value. This is a weird meta in that everyone has the option to curve, so some people will curve. So you need to either curve with them or survive their curve. Like all good decks have to do that. That's non-negotiable. So how do you keep up with their curve? By having a curve of your own. As paladin, how do you do that? By having a whole bunch of 1-drops. Now, what happens if you don't get a lot of 1-drops, or if you don't take a lot of 1-drops? Well, then you need to find a way to stop the opponent's aggression. And paladin's just not as good at that. So that's why you do the 1-drop thing. But even if you're another class and you're trying to stop the aggression, you need taunts, you need heals. And now we'll get to rogues. So with paladins, you take 1-drops because they are good and all that stuff. With rogues, you take 1-drops too because they're all that good. But in addition to taking 1-drops, and as rogues, you don't get as powerful 1-drops as paladins do for their class cards, for example. You don't have Light's Justice. So you're just naturally not going to have as many 1-drops as a paladin would. A paladin could legit replace all 2-drops with 1-drops. In a normal draft without losing value and actually gaining a fairly significant amount of value, as we talked about. A rogue can't do that. But a rogue has a double hit for the hero power. So they gain 1 tempo back. So whether they have a 1-drop or not, they're in a similar position as the paladin. And the cost of that is 2 face damage. Like, not 2 damage, but hitting your face in it twice. So a rogue is going to start off, not even counting the future times the rogue uses its hero power, the rogue is just going to start off the game like down 5 health compared to like any other class. So you need to make up for that in the draft. You need to take your taunts. You need to take your heals. You need to take all of those cards and prioritize them very highly. And we usually do, like on the Lightforge tier list, we give quite a significant bonus to Rogue for those cards. But in this meta, especially if you're drafting without 2s, you need to even step that up maybe even more. And the thing with healing your face as Rogue is you really want a few cards. Like, as Rogue, I only feel comfortable if I have 3 cards that heal my face. Like, 2 cards minimum, but I want 3 cards. And then I want a bunch of taunts too on top of that. Like, it's just, it opens up your strategy so much when you can afford to take hits. And it screws with your opponent so much when you can heal your own face. Like, they sometimes go all in or make some, like, gamble to, like, get reach. Especially, like, as mages or, you know, the new hunter, right? Mages. Or paladins swing weapons to your face. And you can say, oh, no, I'm stabilizing now. And they're like, oh, crap, you stabilized. You've healed. You've taunted. I'm dead. That happens more often than you think. Because remember, destiny of the deck. And if your opponents are creating decks, they have specific win conditions because they have a thumb on the scale now about what kind of deck they're making. They have specific ways they want to play the deck. And they will do that. And they will say, well, 15% of rogues can get out of the situation right now. And so they are correct in doing the thing that they do, and you can just survive it. You cannot be the 85% of rogues that died in this situation. Right? And so that's a very important thing, especially when you get to the high win rates. This is like the difference between like a 9-win deck and a 12-win deck. Because you're facing the 9-win deck that's been hitting that 85% rogue a lot because they're making the correct determinations after they've correctly built their deck. Okay, so that's a lot of talk actually on just like 1 and 2 drops, and how the lack thereof in these 2 best classes right now in the meta is going to shape your entire draft and how you really think about your draft. And we're talking also a lot in how you think about the draft, because remember back into how you draft. First 5 picks, easy. Last 10 picks, easy. Last 10 picks are even the same as you've been doing before, but then middle 15 picks, we can't even tell you how to draft. Like, that's the problem. And if we can't tell you how to draft, we can only tell you what you should think about when creating your destiny, right? Like, these are just the considerations you need to pay a lot of attention to that you didn't have to pay as much attention to before. They were always things. They're just more important things now because you have more absolute control over your deck than you used to in terms of the drafting. Okay, I guess we'll end this Paladin and Rogue session on. I want to talk a little bit about the buckets and how to arbitrage some of the buckets in Paladin and Rogue. So we're using buckets that Taro has because he creates the spreadsheet, and it's been updated since the hotfix when they moved all the buckets around. And we totally suggest you look at it if you're hardcore enough. Otherwise, even if you don't look at it, you'll always be given cards in the correct in the Blizzard buckets, so you don't really have to review it, but it's good to review it if you're like trying to come up with an overall strategy, right? And I like using it for arbitrage purposes, and we'll obviously talk about the biggest issue, which is Silver Sword in our card good bad coming up. But I'm gonna skip the first 3 buckets for Paladin. Actually, the first 3 buckets are, and I'm just gonna start naming these the cards. Right, first bucket is True Silver, Consecration, Blessing of Kings, Aldor, Steed, Vine Cleaver, Call to Arms, Dino Size. If you notice, and this is a problem for Paladin, 3 of the best buffs are here. You have your Blessing of Kings, your Spiker Steed, and your Dino Size. And Bone Mare, by the way, is in the same bucket. These are the only ways that you can buff attack as Paladin now. You don't have other ways to buff attack, and they're all in the same bucket. So if you're facing a Paladin, first of all, a lot of times, like, and I hear this all the time from other people, and it's just wrong in this meta, where they're like, oh, but like the Paladin could buff their thing. Like, no, Paladins don't buff stuff anymore when it comes to attack. Why? Because they're all in the same bucket, and it's the same bucket Vine Cleaver is in, and it's the same bucket Steed is in. So for the most part, unless you're afraid of a Steed, you really shouldn't be considering Blessing of Kings, and you shouldn't be considering Dino Size, because they're inferior picks to Steed, as well as like Vine Cleaver, and they're just not going to be picked all that often. Like, this is, like, I don't mean like when you're drafting to arbitrage it this way, but when you're facing a Paladin, this is an easy way to know what you're facing. don't be afraid of the Paladin buffing stuff anymore. The bucketing system has ruined Paladin's ability to buff stuff besides using steeds. And it doesn't matter if they know this. They're still going to pick the steed because it's right for them. But that means it's also right for you to never play around the Blessing of Kings. Unless, like, it's just like, you know, if you play around it, you have the same thing. You just additionally played around it. If it's not a pure bonus, and you're actually giving up, like, any amount of tempo to play around the Blessing of Kings, like, I wouldn't do it at this in this meta. Now, I'm not saying Paladins never have Blessing of Kings. They do sometimes. But to have it on turn 4, like, and to have a deck that even has it in the first place, it's very rare. Okay. That's one point I want to make about Paladins. And you face a lot of Paladins too, so that's actually kind of an important point. I leave Paladins with stuff on the board all the time to buff, and I like rarely regret it. The thing that's actually more important when it comes to buffing attack, and this is not something you play around, by the way, but it's the second bucket, which has Argent Protector, Hydrologist, Righteous Protector, Lost in the Jungle, Crystal Lion, and Unidentified Maul. Which instantly makes Unidentified Maul the pick. And Unidentified Maul has 2 of its variations that buff the board, one giving Divine Shield and one giving +1 attack to its minions. So you're going to get screwed by that. But you don't play around a 1/4 chance from a card, even if you think your opponents are very likely to have this card, which they are.
Right. And sometimes Divine Shield is the best, sometimes plus attack is the best. You never know. Like sometimes even like the plus, like the one that generates double dudes.
Oh, that's really good.
That's really good, especially on turn 3 with the empty board. You want that one. But you're right, you can't play around it, but it also just means that you're going to see a decent amount of mauls in the arena.
So, like, if you get screwed because Paladins bluff stuff by +1, like, yeah, I'm saying that that's still not Kings, right? Like, I'm saying the way you play around that is different, and you don't play around that. Because they could also have a wolf, right? Like, yeah, they could always buff their things by +1. That's not what you usually when we're talking about, oh, you got to clear the Paladin off the board. We're not saying, like, oh, he may give all his minions +1 attack. That's not the big fear. Other classes would just deal 1 damage, right? Like, from some other source rather than buff.
Yep.
Okay, so that's the second bucket. And the second bucket is much more even, I think. I think it's a more, like, correct bucket that Blizzard put together. So, no real issues there. Third bucket is the fun one for Paladin, and that is Ghostly Charger, which is correctly bucketed in the third bucket. It's that good of a card. If anything, it's like a little under bucketed, I think. But it's also competing against Silver Sword, which, as you know, we made, you see here if you're watching this on YouTube, a 213 on the tier list. It started out as being better than Mindcleaver, and then we made it even higher after we fixed the bug. So we think it's the best card in Paladin. I wouldn't take more than 1 of it. But
I think 2 is okay, but you have to think about the second one. You have to think about the second one. The first one is just like...
The second one only if your deck is so small. Because otherwise, anything else in this bucket is better, I think, than your second Silver Sword. But that first Silver Sword, your 1 copy of Silver Sword, is so good. And again, this is the arbitrage opportunity, right? So if you're building a Paladin deck, you're going to have a Silver Sword. Because they're going to offer you something in this bucket. Silver Sword is a weapon. And it is rare. It just has all the offering bonus attached to it. I still don't know if there's a Witchwood bonus or not, but I don't think there is. But if there is, it would get a Witchwood bonus on top of that. So you're probably going to be offered a Silver Sword at some point, and it's so much better than anything else in this bucket, you're going to take it. Unless you're like too over-weaponed. So just like pretend all of your decks have a Silver Sword in it when you're drafting. That's a good rule of thumb.
Yep.
Okay. And in the same way, the Silver Sword is so much better than all the other cards. Even if it's the first pick, you take the Silver Sword just to make sure you're guaranteed it. And then the next pick, you lose some value and it's fine. Okay. Now, some of the arbitrage opportunities unique to Paladins come in these later buckets. Next bucket, it's Light's Justice, Potion of Heroism, Sound the Bells, Lightfuse Stegodon, Equality, and Sword of Justice. So right off the bat, these cards are not that much worse than the 2 prior buckets. So that's one of the reasons the Paladin is so powerful. Even though they knock down the number of steeds you see and the number of cards you see in the very top bucket, this is is what Blizzard considers the Paladin's like middling bucket. And what it really is not a group of cards that's significantly less valuable than the top buckets, but it's a group of cards that are more difficult to play with. Like Light's Justice, right? Potion of Heroism, they sound the bells. Lightfuse Stegadon, Equality, Sword of Justice even to some extent. They have conditions. They have like decks that they work in and decks that they work less well in. They're the cards that your average player is screwing up with, and that's what's lowering the win rates. They should be as good as your Argent Protector, or your Hydrologist, your Righteous Protector, your Lost in the Jungle, but they're not straightforward and easy to play. And so here, I think this right here, this bucket, whenever you get offered it, this is the destiny of your deck. Your deck can play something like 4 variants of Paladin, and they are the Light's Justice / Equality variant, the Sound the Bells / Potion of Heroism variant, and the Lightfuse Stegadon variant. Those are your Paladin archetypes, right here in this bucket. And whichever one you find yourself fitting your Paladin into, take that card when it's offered. Because this is, and at the same time, right, if this is your first pick or second pick, determine which way you want to build your destiny from your Paladin right here. So
that's interesting.
Again,
this is a good place to get an edge. So first of all, for those of you who think that like we plan all of this ahead of time, we don't. We just get together and then so a lot of stuff that I hear from like Advocate during the Lightforge, it's the first time I hear it, just like you guys. And this is really interesting, like a really good point in which some of these buckets, the reason that they are low isn't just because of the power level, it's just because they're difficult to use. And if you know how to use them, not just how to use the card, and if you know how to build your deck,
right, building the deck,
right, you have like a 2 times edge on these people that aren't able to do that, aren't able to make this bucketed card a cohesive unit in the entire deck, and they will use the card suboptimally in the game, right? Mm-hmm. So in terms of edge, it's like you draft a steed, they draft a steed, there's no edge there. But you draft a, like Light's Justice, and you follow that up with cards that work with it, right? And then you draft like the Repentance afterwards, yes. And you draft the Equality.
Those are the card-to-card synergies I'm talking about, right? You only need 2 or 3 of these other cards in your deck, and you've created a game-winning moment, like a game-winning flip when you hit the synergies.
So that's interesting. Like this is really the place where you get that huge edge. Like you draft a steed, they draft a steed, you draft an Aldor, they draft a Blessing of Kings. It's like there's not really much edge to be made there. Yeah.
But you fit a Light's Justice or an Equality or a Sound the Bells or a Potion of Heroism or a Lightfuse Stegadon in the correct deck, you got something now.
Yeah. You got a stew going.
Okay. So I'm not going to go... that's really the bucket I wanted to get to because that's the big one. The bucket after that is Paragon of Light, which is a great card, Hammer of Wrath, which is a great card, and Drygulch Jailer, which is not a great card, but it's a high synergy card. It's Hammer of Wrath and Paragon of Light are very like normal cards. There's nothing really to like do there, and if you're going for a dude synergy deck, you will know to take a Drygulch Jailer. But like think of the penalty you're paying. Like Drygulch Jailer we have rated very low, and one more thing about the tier list, which I know I haven't like been talking about the update. There's a big giant update coming. We've been doing a lot of things to it to get it more 10.4 ready and to fix the one like very persistent issue with it that we have known about for like a couple months now. I haven't been able to fix, but we fixed it. We just need to roll it out with all the other changes, and that is that we've been a little iffy in terms of figuring out the value of like low mana cards that get added to your hand. So Drygulch Jailer will go up on our tier list value, as well as like Firefly and some of the other ones Gibber and some of the other ones people complain about. But it's still not going to be this good. So you are paying something to get this synergy going, but as you know, this is a really good synergy. Like if you have your Lightfuse Stegadons, adding a Drygulch Jailer to it is winning, like game winning, and you've seen it done. Like you've been the victim of this. Uh, and then the bucket after that, that is before the trash bucket, is Benevolent Jin, Chillblade Champion, Dark Conviction, Arrogant Crusader, Blackguard, Avenging Wrath, Lay on Hands, Level Up. And of course, the card that stands out here is Dark Conviction, which we rate much higher, and I think that's a good arbitrage moment here for Dark Conviction. The other thing that I would like really advise people to like look at a lot, that I don't think I mean, I think most good players do this, but I think a lot of like players who are thinking about this less deeply miss it, and it's Chillblade Champion along with Benevolent Jin, which is sometimes you really have to consider whether your deck needs to heal. Like, you don't, this is the chance to take these cards at pretty decent values. They're not good values for these cards, but as far as healing goes, they're pretty decent. And again, they bait your opponents to doing bad things. And as Paladin, you don't have other heals. Like, you don't have other good valued heals. Heals are all slightly overvalued in Paladins by this bucketing system. So if your deck needs a heal, you have to like give in to Blizzard's bucketing system and take the heals. And this is where you take them. Lay on Hands is also in the same bucket. So this is like the heal bucket. So if you're offered one of these and you're like, oh, I'll get one better later at a higher, like at a better value. Like, you're not. This is it.
This is also good info, because I think people do associate Paladins with heals. It's like, oh, they have ways to heal, right? But not really. Like, and especially not at like they don't have good heals. Yeah. It's not like they have premium cards that also heal. No, their heals are like not great. And in general, heal cards are not fantastic, right? Yeah. And part of that is just because of constructed. Like, they're afraid. I mean, the fear is because healing face is extremely powerful and constructed. So you have to like control that somewhat. But yeah, that's also good to know that like basically your heals are mainly coming from this one bucket, the like one above the last bucket.
Yeah. And so if you get on one of these buckets and it doesn't have a Dark Conviction in it and you think your deck may need a heal, take a heal.
Right.
This is your chance. You're not going to get a better option. Okay, so for the final bucket, and this is the crappy thing, because Paladins have so many cards that I think like probably like barely made this bucket. But it's here. And on the other hand, okay, so here's, anyway, but so they're all in the same bucket, but these are vastly different like values, and usually the things in the last bucket fall into this category of just, you could get value here. And it's Howling Commander, Adaptation, Blessing of Might, Blessing of Wisdom, highly misbucketed, take this card, Eye for an Eye, Hand of Protection, Holy Light, Humility, also pretty good, along, you know, I'd say Humility probably, and Hand of Protection are similar, but they're definitely playable cards. Lesser Pearl Spellstone, Noble Sack, that's a 1-drop, Redemption, Repentance. Repentance works with Light's Justice and a lot of other things as a good synergy pick to make you have those game flipping moments we talk about. And Rebuke. Bellringer Sentry, if for some reason you have a lot of secrets. Cathedral Gargoyle, if for some reason you have a lot of dragons. Blessed Champion, no, don't do that. Don't do Desperate Stand. Divine Favor, we know, is in this bucket, depending on your Artec archetype. Holy Wrath could be good, depending on your deck. Primal Fin Champion, and so there's the when it gets to here, you kind of build you're back into the pre 10.4 system, right? Because it's such a huge bucket and it has such a huge variety of card values in it. So now once again you have to balance the difference between tier list value and what you need for your deck. So it's not like the old drafting system totally went away, but it's only applicable for this last bucket.
Yeah. Cool. Sounds good.
So that's Paladin. Now we'll do Rogue. I hope this is helping, just like hearing the buckets like listed out. And again, thanks to Taro for collecting the information, and thanks to everybody who contributed to like his project.
Yeah, huge thanks, because this is really good. Like, as you're talking about this, you know, each bucket, there's something to be learned here. Not only in terms of what you pick, but like, for example, the Blessing of Kings thing, right? It's like, hey, like that impacts what you do in a game. Like, this is the meta, right? This is exactly the meta. Like, analyzing the game outside of the game itself. Like, what are people picking? What should you play around? What shouldn't you play around? Because it's all about the buckets now. And we didn't know the buckets. And now that we have this information, if you carefully analyze it, you will gain an advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and if you're wondering, that's also why we delayed this, because this is like the meat episode of the Lightforge when it comes to how to win in this meta. And usually we tell this to you in the one after the expansion comes out, like not when the expansion first comes out, but the one after that, which would have been last week's episode. But we didn't do it in last week's episode because the hotfix had just come out, and like honestly, because Taro hadn't made this spreadsheet yet. And so we didn't have this information yet. Like Arena Drafts hadn't gathered the data. Taro hadn't collected data for his spreadsheet. We just didn't have data. And now that we do, we can give you this much better, much more helpful, I think, analysis. And you can do this with every class, but really, like, if you're tryharding, you should be tryharding Paladin Rogues right now. So we're starting here. Anyway, let's start with Rogue. First pick, the top bucket is Backstab, Eviscerate, Sap, SI7, Thaldori Strider, Vile Spine Slayer. One more thing that you should know is if you're a good player, don't take the RNG cards. They've been bucketed according to average players, so don't take them. Just very flat out. And Thaldori Strider is your RNG card here. Never take a Thaldori Strider unless it's like towards the end and you actually need a 4-drop really desperately. Because you're losing out on really good cards to take a Thaldori Strider.
Yeah, especially if you also think about it. I think people know how good like Backstab and Eviscerate are, but my gosh, Sap in a Steed meta is that's ridiculous. Like, if you talk about, you know, rogues being the counter to paladins, it's not just the hero power, it's not just about their tempo, it's about them having like Sap, Vile Spot, like all of these ways to get rid of steeds, but still the best way to get rid of a steed is Sap.
Yep. So in this bucket, I think it's in this meta, this very particular meta with steeds, I think leaning Sap to have at least 1 or 2 in your deck is definitely a very good move. And again, once you think about steeds, you build in Saps. Now that you can build in Saps, and it's also not just Saps, Kidnapper's in the next bucket, which I think is a little over bucketed. Like, we love Kidnapper, but he's not like that good to be like in that bucket. Although that whole bucket is a little lackluster to me. I don't know. So you do still take Kidnapper a decent amount of times. I just like the difference between the Paladin buckets 2, 3, 4 versus the Rogue buckets of 2, 3, 4 is so huge. Anyway, if you sap a lot, what's going to happen? Well, you're either going to go very aggressive, right, and kill them. You sap them before they get to play them back. You use sap as a tempo card, and you kill them all, which is one way to play Rogue. And the other way to play Rogue is, well, if you sap them, you need to draw enough cards to make up for the fact that you just played a card with only tempo but no card advantage. And fortunately, what does Rogue have? A whole crap ton of cards now that just draw you a whole ton of cards and sacrifice tempo. So you either play the balancing game with these like very good options, or you play the very aggressive game. And those are two different deck archetypes, and you have to pick one pretty early. You can't do both. But regardless, you take sap. Sometimes you're not going to be offered sap, or you're already going to have 1 or 2 saps and you don't want more saps. There is such a thing as having too many saps, especially if you are playing the try to get value by drawing cards way. And again, if you're wondering how these work, they all like I did a co-op with Shady the other day using the like draw cards archetype, and he's gotten good results before with like the aggressive archetype. They work. You're in good hands with Rogue regardless. But if you're going for the aggressive archetype and you don't get a sap, you take an Eviscerate because it can go face, right? And if you don't get an Eviscerate, you take like an SI7 agent because it's better tempo, or a Ballspine Slayer, or even a Backstab. But if you're going for the card advantage one, you don't take Backstabs. You know, you don't take Eviscerates. You questionably even take SI7 agents. You're trying for the Wildspine because you want the advantage.
Right.
Okay, so the next bucket, now we're in these like not terribly impressive buckets, especially if you think about Paladin buckets. Defias, Ringleader, Razor Petal Lasher, Assassinate, Blink Fox, Cheap Shot, Envenom Weapon, Kidnapper. Like, Defias shouldn't be here for the most part. Like, you're going to take an Assassinate if you get it. You're going to definitely take a Blink Fox if you can get it. Cheap shot is always good. Envenom weapon sometimes, if you're playing the very aggressive style, envenom weapon is totally great because you don't care as much about your face. If you're playing the more control style, then it's not terribly great because you need way more healing than you're going to be able to get if you take it. And if you take it, you can't have too many other weapons. It's a whole thing, right? Remember, like we said, if your plan is to not have 2-drops and dagger on 2 to get that value, you have to build in that you're 5 life down. Like, you're starting the game with 25 health. And then Kidnapper, right? This is where Kidnapper can become useful in both archetypes. Just because of how things work out. And if you're looking at this, you kind of see that the number of options that you get for the very top bucket, the sap bucket, you have many more options that favor an aggressive style. Whereas the second bucket has many more options that favor a more control style.
Right, yeah.
So that's kind of unfortunate. And what that means is, in order for you to arbitrage as a deck builder, if you get offered the first bucket and you're forced to take like a Backstab or an Eviscerate or an SI7 because you weren't offered a Sap or a Vilespine, then maybe you should go more aggressive. Because your other picks that are coming up are going to be like the bigger things anyway. Like, you should really like take it and go for it. On the other hand, if you are offered something from the second bucket, let's say to start out, and you don't get a lot of the like the high, like the Assassinates or the Blink Fox, and you instead end up with like a Defias Ringleader, you're gonna be in good spot to go aggressive. So anytime, so this is why anytime I take a sap, anytime one of my first cards as rogue is a sap, I'm going control. Because of the way these are like distributed. I know I'm going to get more control cards offered to me. I know I have a better chance of building a great control deck than building a great aggro deck.
Right. At the same time, so for example, the second bucket that you're talking about, we've mostly been talking about the class cards, right?
Yeah.
But there are also new, so if you do go aggressive and you're like, you're not kind of stuck, quote unquote, with
you have a Fireplume Phoenix,
right?
Which is a great card for going aggressive.
Hildnir Frostrider as well.
Yep,
that's fine. So yeah, you're not stuck there. But for the purposes of this Lightforge, we obviously want to focus on the class cards. That's what distinguishes rogues from other classes. So yeah,
we want to focus on like arbitrage opportunities, right? So if you're going the control style and you don't get something with sap, you're still potentially offered like Primordial Drake, for example. Okay, next is the Cavern, Shiny Finder, Plague Scientist, Shadowblade picks, which, you know, we talked about that in the context before of starting your deck out. If you start out with one of these, it's a great way to start building your destiny and your like deck archetype in one way or the other, but otherwise, I don't know, not terribly impressive to me. It's kind of a pity that Cavern, Shiny Finder, and Shadowblade are in the same bucket, because the card you probably want to find with Cavern, Shiny Finder is the Shadowblade. So kind of a unfortunate bucketing. But here's the interesting one for the rogue, as far as the potential to get a lot of value from, besides the last one. And it's Bone Baron, Deadly Poison, Phantom Knives, Hallucination, Elven Minstrel, Perdition's Blade, Patient Assassin. This is very interesting to me as a bucket because it has two, like, of the, okay, maybe even three, like, heavily misbucketed rogue cards. Phantom Knives in a class with no board clears is ridiculous. I don't even care if you're aggressive, right? Like, when you go face and your opponent trades well into you and then plays a bunch of other things with one health, like, you Phantom Knives. If you're playing control, obviously Phantom Knives. Elven Minstrel to get your card advantage back from the saps that you're going to try to be drafting. Perdition's Blade, just a very, very solid card that I'm guessing, and super flexible card that I'm guessing everyone just misplays, which is why it's so low. But more importantly, Perdition's Blade is the one you can match with Cavern Shiny Finder if you want to take that, because it's in the same bucket as Shadowblade otherwise. So if you're going to Cavern Shiny Finder, look for your Perdition's Blades. And if you start out with a Perdition's Blade, Cavern Shiny Finder is probably not a terribly bad idea. Anyway, there's a real, like, you can change your deck a lot with this particular bucket. Next bucket is Cutthroat Buccaneer, Betrayal, Cursed Castaway, Mist Wraith, Lether Onyx Spellstone. This is a pretty simple bucket. Again, you're looking for your synergies here. You have Cutthroat Buccaneer, which is that one draw you like rush minions or something? Combo, sorry. That one draws you combo cards. Am I thinking about this right? Is that a different card? That's Cursed Castaway. Never mind. Cutthroat Buccaneer is the buff your weapon card that you should never take. I don't know why Blizzard has it bucketed here. Betrayal is the card you should take. That's the best card here. That's your default pick. Cursed Castaway is your synergy pick. Mist Wraith is a synergy pick. Lesser Onyx Spellstone is a synergy pick. So do with that what you will. It's pretty straightforward. You'll know which one to take. And if you're in the middle 15 cards, this is a place where you can also direct where your deck goes. And the slightly above average bucket has Cold Blood, Shiv, Sprint, Master of Disguise, Runeforge Hunter, Mimic Pod, Obsidian Shard, Pickpocket, Wanted. So what I want to point out here is that all of your card draw, besides Elven Minstrel, which is again why Elven Minstrel in that bucket is so good. Not only is it under bucketed, but it's in a bucket that doesn't have your other card draws. So if you're going for an aggressive deck and you need to like kind of like reset, right? Like you need to make sure you don't run out of steam. The bucket that you want to take your card draw cards in is in this lower bucket because it doesn't have a lot of very good aggressive cards. Like Cold Blood is your one good aggressive card. And if you don't get offered the Cold Blood and you get offered the other ones, you're going to want to draw some cards because that's a much higher value tier list wise. So when you're arbitraging that, if you're going in a very aggressive way, you may think, oh, Elven Minstrel is great. But if you have a Perdition's Blade or a Deadly Poison or even a Hallucination instead as an option, I think that's better than an Elven Minstrel for an aggressive deck because of the existence of this bucket right here. Like, this is the bucket of Mimic Pod, of Pickpocket, of Sprint. This is your, and even Shiv, right? Like, this is the bucket where you get your card draw value. Oh, and Wanted is also here, just for completeness sake. Don't
Excellent.
take Wanted. All right, and then the final bucket, I'm not even going to go. There's a whole lot of rogue cards. They're pretty, like, correctly bucketed in there, meaning there's nothing here that's, like, so insanely good, like in Paladin, like with, like, Blessing of Wisdom, for example, where you're like, oh my god, this is, like, great value. These are all pretty and you can look at the tier list for that. So okay, that's my giant spiel about paladins and rogues. You should know exactly how to draft those two classes now because I just went over the whole drafting system for how I get 9+ wins per run with these two classes.
So this is something in which, thank you, Adapta, for doing this, for looking at it. Well, first of all, thank you to Taro for putting this together, and also, like, this is what you should be doing if you want to go for the leaderboard, if you want to get that extra edge, right? If you just want to play, like, don't do this. This is something that, like, it's not the most fun thing that people would consider. Adapta and Taro might say otherwise, but it is not what most people consider the most fun thing. But once again, it's one of those things that, like, the top players are going to, climb mountains to try to figure it out, and they will figure it out, right? So if you want to go for the leaderboard, you should look at Taro's list and do exactly what Adapta did. Look at all the buckets and say, where can I get the edges from, right? And also identify, I think this is something key that you identified. Look at every bucket and say, like, oh, Elven Minstrel is the only card draw in the fourth bucket, right? Mm-hmm. So you just know that when you, like, so you know that, like, oh, okay, that's your card draw. But in the second to last bucket, that's where all the card draw is. So now you know sort of how you position this. And also in Taro's sort of list, he has the percentages, right? Like the percentages
for each bucket.
For each bucket.
Like, so what percent chance you'll be offered each of the buckets, and they're not the same class to class. Blizzard adjusts it, I think partly for class balancing concerns, but also partly just based on how many extra cards are in these buckets, right? Like if they stick 10 cards in a bucket, it'll be seen more frequently than if they stuck 3 cards in a bucket.
Right. So, and before I move on, because I've thanked you and I've thanked Taro, we also need to thank Jarkin Hywick, because that was the person who wrote the code to gather this.
To get this. Nice.
So thank you to Jarkin as well, who worked in tandem with Taro. Appreciate the work. But now that we have this, if you guys want that extra edge, don't just like take a look at this and be like, oh, cool, these are the buckets. Do exactly what Advocate did and identify these edges, right? And identify the sort of like, if you want to call it the themes of each bucket, and then see how can I manipulate this, or you just know what's going to happen, how often you're going to see this, and whenever you see a bucket, so you know that you're going to see that quote card draw bucket about 18% of the time with Rogue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then do with that as you will, but this is the stuff that will give you that slight edge, and over 10, 15, 30 runs, you will see, you know, that advantage like basically turn into a few extra wins.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Do we have a question from the GOAT?
Yeah, I do. So anyways, look, we've talked a lot about these numbers. Let's focus on something fun. Monster Hunt has been out. And the question is just, number one, have you played it? Number two, what do you think of it?
Okay, I have not played it. I'm gonna play my first Mount Monster Hunt today after the arena. So I literally have cut myself off from information about Monster Hunt. So I guess this will be my first actual detailed information if you provide any, because I wanted to kind of like just let chat guide me through my first Monster Hunt and see how it goes.
Yeah. So I have played it, but I played it at the very beginning. I haven't played since. It's a lot of fun. You know, initially I was a little bit skeptical about them
redoing the whole dungeon.
Yeah, I was like, wait, why not? Why don't you just add to dungeon runs, right?
Mm-hmm.
It made me a little bit disappointed because there was also a fear. I was like, wait, are you guys kind of abandoning dungeon run? Like, are we just gonna get like new content and sort of? I thought it was kind of a waste, right? It's like, wait, why wouldn't you just add to it? But I like what they did with the new classes. You know, the new hero powers, and it just like with these new classes, they also combine class cards, right? Because these aren't, you know, you're not playing a hunter. Like you're playing these classes that are or these hunters or heroes that have a mishmash of cards from all of the classes. So I like the flavor. The hero powers are really cool. And you don't have the restraint of like having the classes be balanced from constructed and then sort of imported into the dungeon run, right? So it's really cool. I like it. Obviously, I hope that they will continue developing dungeon run for the future. But as for now, I'm like, okay, you know what? I understand. You had this vision, and in order to implement the vision, you had to create this new, this new version, this new format. Which is fine, as long as the product itself is good, right? And I have beaten Houndmaster Shaw. I had a ton of fun. I haven't done the other ones, but looking forward to it.
So here's my question. Better or worse than Dungeon Run? And I don't mean Dungeon Run at the time Dungeon Run came out. I mean today. If someone hasn't played Dungeon Run and they haven't played Monster Hunt, which one would you say is better?
I think you'd have a lot more fun with Monster Hunt.
Ooh, high praise.
Yeah, it's just because the hero powers by themselves are so much more interesting, right? And they've made the hero powers just more powerful. Like with these new classes as well. For example, the Cannoneer, like you have a cannon on board and your hero power is to fire the cannon no matter where it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it introduces positioning, which I know you hate. Although now, like, you know, you're a positioning guy now. That we need to shed that reputation from you.
Oh, I always position if it matters. Like in the
right.
If it matters a lot in a type of game. I don't position when it matters like a tiny bit against one card. I just like forget and I don't like
right.
I don't focus on it.
So I think what Monster Hunt does really well is it just throws out like all of these restrictions, right? And it just says like, let's just make the most kooky, fun experience that we can. And for example, like Toki, right?
Yep.
Toki's hero power is repeat your turn.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you can just do all these RNG stuff, and you can like saying like, yeah, I'm gonna get the the primordial glyphs and everything, and then I get like another roll of it, right? Like it's just wackiness and craziness and tons of fun. So I would say for someone going into the game today, as long as you know the cards, because I think Monster Hunt is also like a little bit less friendly for like true beginners, right? Like beginners. But for people that know the game and they're coming back in, they're like, oh, I only have a little bit of time. What should I play? Definitely Monster Hunt. I think it's the much more fun version.
Cool. All right. That's Question from the Goat, brought to you by our patrons, patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thank you guys so much for your support. We are, oh God, this has been I didn't realize how much content that we had.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't do Paladins without Rogue, and I couldn't do Rogue without Paladin. Those are really the two in the meta right now. And I couldn't do any of them without the actual drafting philosophy, or else it wouldn't make as much sense. So, I hope you guys enjoyed all of that. We could talk about Silver Sword. I actually feel like we've talked about it enough. So, card good, bad on Silver Sword, we're just not going to do. It's good. It's very good. Take our word for it. Have one copy in every single Paladin deck you have. Doesn't matter what kind of deck. It is heavily misbucketed. I don't know how people are messing it up to get the win rates not like ridiculous. Maybe they're drafting multiple copies and it's not doing so well. Who knows? Anyway, heavily misbucketed card. Just make sure you get one of them in every single Paladin deck. It will serve you well. You've probably lost to it a fair number of times. That I don't think there's that many people left who do not believe in the power of a Silver Sword. But if you are a numbers guy, you have heard of earlier Lightforge, the numbers are within your next turn from an empty board, on average, you will get your tempo back that you lost on the turn you play it. And then you have 2 turns of just pure win, assuming you're alive. So that's it for us at the Lightforge. Thank you guys so much for listening, and tune in next week. We will continue to dive into this meta, maybe going beyond Paladins and Rogues, but that'll depend on whether the other classes seem more viable. Like right now, really, if you're playing serious, you play Paladin Rogue. All right, that's it from us. Until next week, this is Abwicto.
This is Merps. Good luck drafting your buckets, guys.
See ya. All right.